Have you ever wondered what would happen if the life of your loved one hung in the balance? And what if the person who could save them was hindered by irrational prejudices? That's exactly the question Dr. Ethan Blake faced on that fateful night. Join me as we follow this gripping story to see what Dr. Ethan Blake will do to overcome these harsh trials, and whether justice will prevail. Nearly midnight, Dr. Ethan Blake's phone rang on his nightstand, jolting him awake from the few precious hours of sleep he had managed to snatch. He blinked groggily at the screen, and when he saw the hospital's number, his heart sank. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. He answered on the second ring. "Blake here," he said, sitting up and rubbing his face. "Dr. Blake, this is Amy from the A hurried voice on the other end said, "We have an emergency. A teenage girl in critical condition. Car accident on Highway 74. It's bad. We need you here now." His pulse quickened. He was one of the few surgeons in all of Monroe County certified to handle high-risk vascular trauma. If they were calling him, it meant the girl didn't have much time. "I'm on my way," he replied, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed, grabbing his keys, and slipping into his sneakers. His mind raced. Highway 74. How many times had he warned the town council about that stretch of road? Poor lighting, sharp curves, and narrow shoulders made it a death trap, especially for young drivers. He sprinted to his car, a sleek black Tesla he had worked years to afford, and peeled out of the driveway onto the quiet, dark streets. He lived only 20 minutes from the hospital, but tonight, every second felt like an eternity. The girl was Sheriff Marcus Hayes' daughter, a fact Ethan learned as he sped down Main Street, the hospital calling him with updates. He knew the sheriff well. They had crossed paths at town events. Hayes wasn't a bad guy, but Ethan couldn't ignore the way the man avoided eye contact when race issues came up in conversations. But there was no time to dwell on that now. Someone's life was on the line, and that was all that mattered. He gripped the steering wheel, weaving through the rare red lights, praying he wouldn't hit traffic. But he wasn't prepared for what happened next. As he approached a four-way intersection, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, followed by the wail of a siren. "Are you kidding me?" he muttered under his breath, his foot instinctively easing off the gas. He pulled over, his heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the emergency. But what should have been a brief explanation and a warning about his speed turned into something much worse. Dr. Ethan Blake rolled down his window, gripping the steering wheel as the officer approached. The bright beam of the flashlight flickered across his face, momentarily blinding him. He squinted, trying to keep his composure, even though his heart was hammering. This wasn't the first time he had been in a situation like this, and he knew how these situations could play out. The police officer leaned down, his face unreadable beneath his cap. "Do you know how fast you were going?" he asked, his voice curt. "I'm sorry, officer," Ethan began, his voice steady but hurried. "I'm a surgeon. I just got an emergency call to the hospital. Someone's life is in danger." The officer's expression didn't change. He shone his flashlight into the car, glaring at Ethan's surgical scrubs and the hospital ID clipped to his pocket. "License and registration," the officer demanded. Ignoring the explanation, Ethan's jaw tightened, but he complied, reaching for his wallet in the glove compartment. "Look, I know I was speeding, but it's because a young girl, Sheriff Hayes' daughter, no less, is in critical condition. If I don't get to the hospital, she could die." The second officer, who had been standing behind, now stepped closer, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "And why should we believe you?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Are you sure you're not trying to cover up a hit and run or something? People like you are capable of anything." Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time he'd been suspected or treated with hostility just for existing in spaces where people didn't think he belonged. "Here's my ID," he said, holding it out for them to see. "I'm a surgeon at Monroe County General Hospital. Please call them if you need to. But I don't have time for this." The first officer took the ID and examined it, his partner taking a slight step back but not relaxing. Minutes ticked by as they radioed in to verify his identity. Ignoring his repeated pleas about the urgency of the situation, Ethan glanced at the dashboard clock. 7 minutes had passed since they stopped him. 7 minutes that could mean the difference between life and death. His hands began to shake. Not from fear, but from sheer frustration. "Officers, I'm begging you," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "Every second counts. If it was your daughter, you'd want me to go." The first officer finally returned his documents, but didn't move from the car. "You got lucky tonight," he muttered, though there was no apology in his voice. "Slow down, and next time, don't speed like that, or we won't be so lenient." Ethan didn't wait for further permission. He pulled back onto the road, tires squealing slightly as he accelerated. The hospital was now only 10 minutes away, but it felt like an eternity. But as Ethan raced towards his destination, he didn't know that the incident wouldn't end there. Dr. Ethan Blake's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he sped towards the hospital. His heart pounding, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. The delay, the questions, the way the officer's suspicion had wasted precious minutes he needed to save a life. He tried to push it out of his mind, to focus on the surgery ahead, but the anger lingered. 10 minutes later, he screeched into the hospital parking lot. As he rushed through the sliding doors of the Amy, the nurse who had called him, waved him over. "She's in critical condition," Amy said quickly, leading him down the hallway. "Internal bleeding, possible ruptured vessels." The paramedics stabilized her, but she's deteriorating rapidly. "What's her blood pressure?" Ethan asked, immediately switching into professional mode. As they reached the operating room, 60/40 when we brought her in. He nodded, slipping into his surgical gown as they entered the OR. "We don't have a second to lose." The patient lay on the operating table, pale, still, and connected to a web of machines. Ethan's chest tightened as he saw the familiar face of Sheriff Hayes. Hayes through the small observation window above the operating room. The sheriff's hand pressed against the glass, his face a mix of fear and helplessness. Ethan didn't have time to dwell on it. He focused entirely on the task at hand, directing his team as they opened the girl's abdomen and worked to stop the bleeding. The OR was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and Ethan's clear, steady voice guiding each step. But despite his focus on the room, Ethan's mind kept drifting back to what had happened earlier. How much time had been wasted? Could those precious minutes have made a difference in the girl's critical condition? He pushed the thoughts aside and concentrated on saving her life. 2 hours later, the surgery was over. Ethan stepped out of the OR, exhausted but relieved. He saw Sheriff Hayes waiting in the hallway, pacing back and forth. The man stopped when Ethan approached, his eyes fixed on Ethan's blood-stained scrubs. "She's stable," Ethan said simply. "It was close, but we saved her." Hayes let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping as relief washed over him. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice choked up. "Thank you for saving my daughter." Ethan nodded, but didn't reply immediately. He should have left, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the lingering anger from before, or perhaps it was the sheer absurdity of the night. "I almost didn't make it in time. You know," Ethan said finally, his voice calm but firm. "Your officers stopped me. They wasted time questioning whether I belonged on that road. Time that could have cost your daughter her life." The sheriff's face hardened, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features. "I'll look into it," he said, avoiding Ethan's gaze. "That's not good enough," Ethan replied, his voice steady but sharp. "This isn't the first time this has happened to me. But tonight, it almost cost someone their life. Your daughter's. If that doesn't make you see the problem, I don't know what will." Hayes didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. But the conversation didn't end there, and neither did the night. The hospital hallway fell into an oppressive silence after Ethan's words. Sheriff Hayes stood rooted to the spot, his face unreadable, but the tension was unmistakable. Ethan wasn't expecting an apology. Not immediately. He'd seen that look too many times before. A mix of guilt, pride, and resentment. He sighed, tired, and turned to leave. "Wait," Hayes called after him, his voice low. Ethan stopped, but didn't turn back immediately. "What exactly happened out there?" Ethan turned back, his gaze unwavering. "Your officers stopped me for speeding. I told them I was on my way to save a life. Your daughters, and they didn't care. They treated me like a suspect, not a doctor. I had to beg them to let me go. I lost over 7 minutes. You know how crucial 7 minutes are in an emergency." Hayes's face paled, and he looked away for a moment. I wasn't aware, he mumbled. That's the problem, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. You weren't aware, and you didn't care to be. And that's the mentality those officers had tonight. It's not just about me. It's about anyone who looks like me in this town. If it hadn't been your daughter, would you have cared what happened? Would they have cared? Hayes's jaw tightened. For a moment, it seemed he would argue. But then something shifted. The reality of Ethan's words seemed to hit him. His daughter's life had hung in the balance, and the prejudices he'd overlooked for years had almost taken it all away. I'll take care of this, he said quietly. Ethan shook his head, his frustration boiling over. Take care of it how? A slap on the wrist. Another memo about treating people with respect? That's not enough. You have to change the culture. Hayes, you have to set an example. Because if you don't, it's only a matter of time before someone else's life is ruined. Or worse. Hayes stared at him, speechless. Before he could respond, a voice interrupted them. Sheriff Hayes, one of the nurses called. Stepping into the hallway. Your daughter's awake. Hayes immediately turned towards the recovery room, but not without giving Ethan a lingering look. There was something in his eyes. Perhaps gratitude, perhaps regret, but Ethan didn't wait to find out. He walked away, the exhaustion finally catching up to him as he returned to the doctor's lounge to change. He couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. About Hayes's expression, about how the officers had treated him, about his own helplessness despite his position, his qualifications, and his life-saving role. But no matter how much he wanted to put the night behind him, he knew it wasn't over. As soon as he stepped into the doctor's lounge, the two officers who had stopped him earlier entered, heading straight for the recovery room where Hayes's daughter was. Ethan froze, a surge of anger rising within him. He knew these men didn't deserve to be anywhere near her. Hayes, standing beside his daughter's bed, saw them and his face darkened. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice cold. We came to see the girl, one of the officers replied, slightly taken aback by Hayes's tone. Get out of here, Hayes ordered, his voice echoing through the room. You're not welcome here. The two officers exchanged confused glances. But Sheriff, the other began. But Hayes cut him off. I don't want to hear anything from you. You're both suspended, and you're both fired. Effective immediately. You abused your power. You violated police regulations. And you almost cost my daughter her life. Get out of here, and don't ever come back. The two officers paled, cold sweat breaking out on their foreheads. They looked at each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Sir, Sheriff, we just wanted, one of them stammered. But Hayes cut him off again. Shut up. Who do you think you are? Do you think you have the right to decide who lives and who dies? Do you think you have the right to treat people like trash just because they have a different skin color? You're wrong. You're dead wrong. We're sorry, Sheriff, the other said, his voice trembling. We didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? Hayes roared, his voice filled with fury. You didn't mean to almost kill my daughter? You didn't mean to waste precious time of a doctor trying to save a life? You didn't mean to subject an innocent man to humiliation and injustice? The two officers hung their heads, unable to meet Hayes's eyes. They felt shame, humiliation, and fear. They knew they had made a grave mistake, and they would pay for it. They turned and walked out of the room, not daring to look at Ethan, who stood watching everything with a cold expression. Justice had been served, right before his eyes. This story serves as a potent reminder of the perils of prejudice and the importance of empathy. The racism that Dr. Ethan Blake endured nearly led to a tragedy, underscoring the urgent need for a shift in ingrained biases. The narrative also showcases the power of persistence and courage, as Dr. Blake refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Ultimately, the story offers hope for change, demonstrating that even in the most challenging circumstances, justice can prevail. For Dr. Ethan Blake, change never comes easily, but perhaps it takes a moment of crisis for people to see what has long been broken. Systemic racism, disregard for human life, and blatant abuse of power. But seeing is just the first step. What happens next is up to all of us. If you've watched this far, ask yourself, what would you do if you were in Dr. Ethan Blake's position? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to follow our latest videos.